One of baseball's most interesting and controversial figures in Jose Canseco perhaps reached his peak in that sense with the release of his book Juice in 2005, a book that not only detailed parts of Canseco's life, but also exposed many of baseball's top players as steroid users, going a long way in the fallout of the steroid era. So let's look at how that book came to be and the aftermath.
Totally sports-esque. Major league.
Jose Canseco was truly one of the most exciting players the game has ever seen. He was the first member of the 40-40 Club, accomplishing the feat in 1988. The same year, he won MVP. He would continue to be one of the best in the game while wearing an A's uniform, helping them win the World Series in '89, with him and Mark McGwire becoming known as the Bash Brothers. But suddenly in the middle of 1992, Canseco would be traded to the Texas Rangers, joining Rafael Palmeiro, Ivan Rodriguez, and Juan Gonzalez. And throughout the 90s, Canseco would deal with injuries and many highs and lows. Canseco had great seasons with the multitude of teams he played on, including recording 2 of his highest 3-season batting averages in Boston, hitting 46 home runs in Toronto, making his final All-Star game in Tampa Bay, and doing enough to win a World Series ring with the Yankees in 2000, with Roger Clemens playing alongside him in Boston, Toronto, and New York. And after that 2000 season, a season which Canseco described as the worst time of his career, he was signed by the Angels in January of 2001. Then he was cut during spring training 2 months later. He spent half the season in an independent league before he played 76 games for the White Sox, hitting 16 home runs and driving in 49, putting him on pace to hit 30 home runs and drive in 100 at the age of 36. And his 16th home run was his 462nd of his career, putting him 38 home runs away from the 500 milestone. He would then sign a contract with the Expos in 2002, which would have been the first NL team he would play for. But just like the previous season, he was cut during spring training, and he declined an offer to be a part of their AAA team and instead signed a contract with the White Sox to be a part of their AAA team. And after hitting just 172 in 18 games, Canseco just didn't show up one day and announced his retirement, with his agent saying he wanted to spend more time with his young daughter. And just because he retired didn't mean Canseco was leaving the headlines that his name has always been in. Weeks after his retirement, Canseco said he felt that he had been blackballed from baseball, and he continued to feel that way as he made multiple attempts to return to the majors in the following years. And a week after his 2002 retirement, Canseco took aim at baseball's underlying problem with steroids, saying there would be no baseball left if they drug tested everyone today. It's completely restructured the game as we know it. That's why guys are hitting 50 or 60 or 70 home runs. He also announced that he was writing a tell-all book about PEDs in baseball. That wouldn't be released for a few years, but in this time, Canseco was still having trouble with the law. Canseco already had a few charges and arrests to his name, and added another in October of 2001, when him and his brother Ozzy got into a fight at a Miami nightclub that left one man with a broken nose and the other needing 20 stitches in his lip. Him and his brother would receive probation and orders for community service. But 2 years later, a judge felt that Canseco was not taking his probation serious enough. He did not take anger management courses, nor did he perform community service. And he also tested positive for steroids in June of 2003, something that had been banned by the terms of his probation. And as a result, he spent a month in jail without bail, a time which he described as the low point of his life. And at the same time, the issue of steroids in baseball was becoming very serious. Just a few weeks after Canseco retired, Ken Caminiti told Sports Illustrated that he used steroids during his 1996 MVP season, and estimated that half of the players in the majors were using them. And in August of 2002, the players and owners agreed to their first joint drug program since 1985, with calls for anonymous testing to begin in 2003. And during 2003, 5 to 7% of the over 1,400 tests were positive, and as a result, random testings that were positive now had penalties starting in 2004, light compared to what they are now, as a first offense would lead to counseling, and a second offense would lead to a 15-day suspension. This went into effect in June, months after numerous players including Barry Bonds and Jason Giambi were called to testify in front of a grand jury investigating Balco. And the random testing program would only get stricter after the Anabolic Steroid Control Act of 2004 was signed into law, with every steroid-based drug banned by Congress being added to baseball's ban list. And before the 2005 season began, the penalty is increased to a 10-day suspension for first-time offenders, with their names being released to the public. And with tons of media coverage for the Balco scandal and an increased awareness of the steroid issue across the nation, Jose Canseco picked the perfect time to release his book, years in the making, entitled Juiced: Wild Times, Rampant Roids, Smash Hits, and How Baseball Got Big. The book was highly anticipated and hit the top of the bestsellers list just based on pre-orders alone. And before the book was released, the people that were reported to be mentioned in the book came out and denied all Canseco's claims. And the most discussed was his teammate and other half of the Bash Brothers, Mark McGwire. Canseco said he personally introduced McGwire to steroids and helped him inject steroids into his buttocks. And McGwire was not the only player mentioned. Along with McGwire, Canseco said he personally introduced and injected his Rangers teammates Juan Gonzalez, Ivan Rodriguez, and Rafael Palmeiro. He also mentioned Miguel Tejada, Jason Giambi, Sammy Sosa, and Roger Clemens amongst the users, though he did say Clemens' use was a rumor he heard, and he never personally saw Clemens take steroids. And upon release on Valentine's Day, numerous members of the so-called baseball establishment would take shots at Canseco. Baseball writer Alan Barra called it the worst sports book so far in 3 centuries. Other writers such as Thomas Boswell and Tom Verducci mentioned how little credibility Canseco had. And that was the worst thing Canseco had going for him in this sense. With Canseco's off-field problems and his personality, it's not like Jose Canseco was seen as the most trustworthy guy in the world in 2005. And Thomas Boswell, one of the writers who attacked Canseco, had problems with Canseco for over a decade at that point. As in the aftermath of his 40-40 MVP season in 1988, Boswell accused Canseco of taking steroids, and as the A's were readying themselves for the playoffs, those claims were talked about everywhere, causing Canseco to come out and deny all those claims, with his then retired teammate Reggie Jackson and manager Tony La Russa also denying the claims. Regardless, Canseco said that Pepsi pulled a $1 million endorsement from him as a result, and steroid chants were heard throughout Fenway during the ALCS, a series that he dominated. And over a decade later, the one who passionately denied the charges was now the real leader of exposing the issue, and Canseco's manager, who defended him in 1988, was kind of in a way still doing so, as the night before the book's release, Canseco appeared on 60 Minutes, and so did Tony La Russa, who denied that any substances were being used in the A's locker room, and said Canseco wrote the book because he was in dire straits, which to be fair was true. Canseco was facing financial problems that would lead to him filing for bankruptcy in 2012. And during his house arrest in 2003, after he missed a court date, he tried to charge fans $2,500 to hang out with him at his house. But despite the criticism from writers and denial from players, if Canseco's only intentions were to sell books and make money, then it was working. The book wasn't just about steroids and baseball, but really all about Canseco's life and career, including his relationship with Madonna, his experiences with different managers, meeting women while on the road, how he met his wives, along with the domestic abuse case, and the brawl in Miami in 2001, and how he felt that MLB set up the drug test that led to his arrest in 2003, along with his very believable claims that he ran a 3.9 second 40-yard dash. And something that is a little overlooked in the book is that Canseco advocates for steroid use, saying that it will make you stronger, sexier, and healthier. But of course, he said the drug should be taken in small doses and be done with supervision. The book was well talked about, and as they say, there's no such thing as bad publicity. And it was true in this case, as the book topped the New York Times bestsellers list for 7 weeks, and it had real-life consequences for Canseco and the names listed in the book. As Canseco's book sat on top of the bestsellers list, he would join a few players he mentioned in the book in front of the House Government Reform for an all-day nationally televised hearing. The most notable names there were Canseco, Sammy Sosa, Alex Rodriguez, Curt Schilling, Rafael Palmeiro, and his bestie, Mark McGwire, as their first time appearing together since 1997 was not an anniversary or anything, but rather at a hearing, and the entire ordeal was embarrassing. Mark McGwire was near tears in his opening statements and would proceed to basically imply that he took steroids. When directly asked if he took steroids, McGwire said, "I'm not here to talk about the past," which is actually kind of why they were there. Sammy Sosa suddenly forgot how to speak English, maybe being under oath. It was smart to go through an interpreter, but the interpreter would end up lying for him. And in a shocking twist, Jose Canseco was probably the most honest person there, though he didn't answer all the questions, unless granted immunity from prosecution, as he was still on probation in the state of Florida. And Rafael Palmeiro gave us maybe the most memorable moment, when he said,
"Let me start by telling you this. I have never used steroids, period."
And the reason that quote and Canseco's book became so memorable is the aftermath. 6 weeks after the hearing, Palmeiro tested positive for a steroid called stanozolol, and after appeals, he would be suspended for 10 days and would play his last MLB game weeks later. And by the end of 2007, as Barry Bonds was the new home run king, Canseco's book would have much more credibility with the release of the Mitchell Report, a report that almost every player listed in Canseco's book appeared on. Amidst the release of Canseco's book, public opinion was already shifting one way, from hoping the players were right in saying they never took steroids, to accepting it and turning to anger. And Canseco's book, along with kind of being a money grab, just fueled the flames and added more to what the general public pretty much already suspected. And ultimately, Canseco would say he regretted writing the book and mentioning the players' names, as he said he never realized this was going to blow up and hurt so many people. ultimately admitting that he wanted revenge on Major League Baseball as he still believes he was blacklisted from the game. And really, you can say that all of this was going to come out anyway, but that book along with his second book, Vindicated, were a big part of the downfall of the entire era. In that second book, Canseco clarified info from the first book and also talked about other players, such as his other best friend Alex Rodriguez, along with the 1998 pool party at his house. That became a huge issue when Roger Clemens and trainer Brian McNamee appeared before a congressional committee and they would deny steroid use, discuss HGH, and say that they did not attend a pool party at Canseco's house where their book club and steroids were discussed. Canseco claimed Clemens wasn't there, but an 11-year-old who attended the party showed a photo of him and Clemens at the party during his second trial for obstruction of Congress and 5 other counts in 2012, a trial in which he was found not guilty. Many, especially those within the game, call Canseco a snitch and a liar, amongst many things, and the entire situation is similar to what Jim Bowden faced in 1970 when he released the book Ball 4. The book is a tell-all of his experiences during the 1969 season he spent with the Seattle Pilots and the Houston Astros. In it, he talks about the unseen parts of baseball and the players and the management, including the jokes, the womanizing, relationships, and the drinking and the drugs, especially amphetamines, which he described as rampant amongst players. And just like Canseco's book, this would be a bestseller and also create controversy in the baseball world. Commissioner Bowie Kuhn called the book detrimental and even went so far to try and get Bowden to sign a statement saying that the book was fictional, but it wasn't. And Bowden became very unpopular amongst teammates who he felt broke the unspoken rule of not letting anything leave the clubhouse. And what the book is remembered most for amongst many things is the details of Mickey Mantle's excessive lifestyle. Even though he talked about Mickey in a positive light, Bowden was essentially blacklisted from the game, just like Canseco, with numerous players denouncing the book and Pete Rose yelling "F you, Shakespeare" every time Bowden took them out. But both Bowden and Canseco's books can define an era of baseball and a part most fans try to ignore, and even more so in Canseco's sense. Canseco didn't have much to lose with the release of the book, considering his reputation, but just in terms of the effect steroid accusations had on Hall of Fame voting, Canseco may have had the biggest impact, as he received just 1.1% of the vote. If Canseco had the same career without the steroids, he would have been a borderline first ballot Hall of Famer. But even without the release of the book, he was never getting close in the aftermath of his career. Canseco's book and general attitude is very interesting in the sense that it's the plot of a revenge movie with Canseco playing the villain. And with the fallout of all he said in the book, and in testimonies and interviews, it's interesting that the one who is often called the godfather of steroids in baseball is the one who went a long way in steroids leaving baseball. And you can watch my recent video about Rafael Palmeiro and his involvement with Canseco and his quick fall from grace.